On the next episode of Painting and Travel, Roger and Sarah Bansemer explore the rivers and wildlife of Florida's Gulf Coast. So climb aboard the pontoon boat, get your paints out, and join in as Roger paints the Withlacoochee River.
Sarah and I are on the Withlacoochee River with our friends Heidi and Mark that have brought us out on their pontoon boat. And I've been on a lot of rivers. I've grown up in Florida, but this little tributary off the Withlacoochee River here is one of the most beautiful, pristine spots I've ever seen. So I'm going to try and do a small painting here on an 11 by 14 inch piece of masonite. I'm going to use a very limited palette today, just white, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and Indian yellow. I may add some other colors later, but that's what I'm going to start with. I have a variety of brushes here, some flat brushes, a couple pointed brushes for detail, and a couple of fan brushes. I have an atomizer. This keeps my paint wet, keeps my board a little bit wet too, and since I'm using acrylics, these dry very quickly, especially out in the heat. Yankeetown lies about 80 miles north of the Tampa Bay area on the west coast of Florida and has a population of about 650 residents. There's not a lot here except natural, unspoiled beauty, a quality getting increasingly harder to find along the Florida coast. The Withlacoochee River begins at the Green Swamp in west central Florida. It flows more than 80 miles until it reaches Yankeetown and then empties into the Gulf. At the end of the town, there's a public ramp where local residents launch their boats among the wide expanse of marshlands in the Gulf of Mexico. Here we saw a dolphin working in unison, herding a school of mullet for an early morning breakfast. The river offers safe harbor to small boats mainly used for recreational fishing. A number of commercial shrimp boats also use it as their home port. It's a great place for many artists like myself to paint nautical subjects. Ospreys are a common sight along the river, and many have large nests in dead trees. Ospreys with their wingspan of between 60 and 70 inches flourish here with a plentiful food supply. Alligators, on the edge of extinction 40 years ago, are estimated to number over 1 million today, and here they are a common sight. One of the most beautiful sights along the river were these Roseate Spoonbills. They prefer fresh water, but can be found along the shore as well. So this environment of brackish water suits them perfectly. When feeding, their flat bill is partially open, and as it sweeps from side to side, tiny hairs on the edge of their bill help them sense any tiny fish or crustaceans they come in contact with, and their bill quickly snaps shut. These birds are always a pleasure to see and have been a subject of many of my Florida paintings. Well, that's a short tour of Yankeetown and the Withlacoochee River. Now you can understand why I found this area to be such a rewarding and fulfilling corner of Florida to paint. These paints have only been on this palette for a short time and they're already getting dry. These three colors here are translucent. They're not opaque. The only thing opaque here is this white. I'm just using a big brush. I'm going to block in these areas. I'm not going to worry about any detail at this point. I'm going to just try and get my big areas, then I'll work the smaller areas into the bigger areas, trying to establish some kind of a composition here. Since all the interest is down here in the water and in these trees, I'm going to have the horizon line a little bit high on this canvas. I certainly don't want it in the center, and since there's more interest down in this area than there is the sky, all this will be in the top third of the painting. Right now I'm not very worried about colors. I'm concerned with values. Never had much luck in taking a smaller painting and translating it into a larger painting. Some artists are good at that, but I'm not. They just don't seem to translate for me. So I'm not doing a study here. I'm trying to do a painting. I always say if this doesn't come out very good, then it's a study. If it comes out good enough to put a frame on, then it's a painting. I'm taking this 1-inch brush, and I'm going to cover this canvas as quickly as I can. It's not that I want to get done faster. I'm trying to hurry because I have all the time I want, but just to get the basics down. A lot of my brush strokes, even if they're rough looking brush strokes, can remain rough, and the texture on these brush strokes sometimes add a lot to the finished painting. I haven't used any white yet on my canvas. We've also seen quite a few ospreys nesting on the river. I start with my darks, and I work towards my lights. This is a constant juggling act between different values and different colors. When I put one color here, it affects the way I see another color next to it. So until I get this whole canvas covered, I'm not going to really know if the colors I'm putting down are correct. So they have to be adjusted all the time. I have a very gray sky today, but there have been a lot of fires in Georgia and Florida recently, so there's a bit of a haze in the air. Now I can see by adding this sky how this really changes the way I'm thinking about these dark values down here. This appears to be a very warm sky to me today. This will be a fun area to work in because I'll have the opportunity to make a lot of negative areas in here to bring out these trees, the cedar trees and the palm trees. Got some water back here. And a little more Indian yellow. I generally work with more colors on my palette than this, but this water changes all the time with the breeze that comes by. I think I'll spray my board a little bit. These paints are already dry down here. So what the water does is it just lets me spread these new paints on a little bit quicker, a little bit easier, so they don't drag. This painting looks very dark right now, as do most of my paintings when I first start. But I like to work from dark to light, so I'll put in all these darks first and put the lights over them. Get rid of this dry paint. Carry this little box. There, now I have a fresh start. Well, this is a fairly good composition right now. What I've done is divided this into thirds, basically, and I almost do that naturally. I've done this so much. It's not always the case, but we got 2/3 down here and about 1/3 here. And then same way with the center of interest. We don't have this in the center of the painting. We have this moved over to the right a little bit, so it's also, we got maybe 2/3 here and 1/3 here. So we got a nice division of space. If I didn't have that good division of space, no matter what I did from here on out, the painting would just not, just wouldn't make it, wouldn't be a good painting. Not to say that this is going to be a good painting, that's yet to be seen, but at least I have a good start on this. I'm going to get a smaller flat brush, and I'll start working into some of these big areas. I'll start putting some lights on top of these, and then I'll start working on the negative areas. I think right now I'll work on this sky just a little bit more. It's a real limited palette here. I'm just working with 3 colors. I generally work with a lot more colors. And it really is amazing how many different values and colors and relationships with colors you can get with just these 3 colors. But one key is that all these colors here are translucent. If I had cadmium yellow light on here, that's an opaque color. If I had cerulean blue on here, that's an opaque color. It wouldn't work as well. These 3 colors are transparent, so they're going to give me all good dark colors to start with. When I say opaque color, what I mean is that it has no white in it. ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and Indian yellow have no white in them, and that's why I can get these dark colors. I think I'll warm the sky up a little bit down here towards the horizon. It's usually, well, it's always darker up towards the zenith. It's always cooler up there too. So even though I'm not seeing much of the sky here, I'm going to warm this up just a little bit down here. I'm going to start working with these negative areas here to define these trees. And the negative areas are the spaces of sky that I'm seeing between these trees, and that's going to define things like branches and the trunks. And when I paint these negative areas, they have to be a little bit darker than this sky. If they were the same color or same value as this sky, they would appear to be much lighter. And the reason would be is because there's so much contrast between these little spots and the dark. So I make these darker than this out here, and they'll appear to be exactly the same value. It's really hard to know where to put these negative areas in sometimes, because these areas here are going to describe all those branches. So what I do sometimes is just take some paint, even the same value, the same color, anything as this. I can even take just some water and make some branches here. I'm sure you can't see this on the video because it's so close to the same value, but just with some water, I can paint some branches. Now those are going to evaporate in just a second or two, but it gives me sort of an indication of where those branches are so I can paint around them. I'll be finishing this back in the studio because what I have here, when I compare this to nature, what I'm looking at, all this beauty and texture, and it's so involved that it's just very hard to relate what I'm doing here to the real thing. So when I bring this back in the studio, I can then separate myself and my thinking from nature itself and concentrate solely on the painting. But I'll get as much as I can from nature. Before I go any further and before the light changes anymore, I'm going to take my camera. I always bring this with me. So I'll take a few pictures up here. I'll take a few details later on too. So I'll have some reference to work by. This is very important. There's a manatee that's come right up here to the boat right now. I'm going to put a wash of lighter colors over these dark colors in here now. I'll let some of these dark colors continue to bleed through. What I have back here in the distance is a lot of atmosphere between me and those trees way back there. So I'm going to mix up some ultramarine blue just to get that real cool. I'm going to add those back in here like that. Yeah, that puts them in the very far distance. This horizon looks a little bit high, or these trees look a little bit low. So I need to change that. So I think instead of lowering this horizon a little bit, I think I'll raise these trees up a bit. Now the description of all these trees and palm trees and cedar trees, the description of these trees lies at the edge of the form. You can tell this is a palm tree not by what is in here, because if we isolated that little area right there, it's just really a black spot. So what defines this area is the edge of the form. Compositionally, I'm seeing another problem I've created for myself here, which I think I can correct. That is, I have this center of interest, which is this big stand of trees, primarily the cedar tree. But I have two palm trees, one on either side of it. That causes a big equality problem. And equality with human beings is important, but in paintings, it's not such a good thing. So I think what I need to do is I need to add another couple of palm trees here, or maybe just place some in this area here, because I don't want this all equal. So since this is a very dark area in here, this is not much going on, I think the best solution would be to add of palm trees within that area. And there are some in there to begin with, so it's not a stretch. Okay, so now I have three palm trees. They're all sort of equal height. This one's a little higher, but to create a little more interest, I think I'll bring another palm tree down in this area and put it low. I don't think I'd want to put it over here because then I'd run into the same problem. I'd have two here and two palm trees here. So this will break up that space. Again, I'm working from dark to light, so I've still got these dark here, and then I'll just keep adding a little bit of light as I go. I haven't used any pure white yet. I usually reserve this to last, but a little while ago I saw some sunlight way back in that distance there. A little patch of sunlight way over there to the right, and soften that just a bit. And what that gives me the opportunity to do is continue that sunlight here and there amongst these trees, which will give a little extra added dimension. Just show me where another layer of this landscape is. Now I can't really see it in here, but I had given to me an artistic license, but this allows me to make any changes I want and not feel guilty about it. I don't need to paint around all the areas of these palm trees. In other words, paint the negative areas. I'm, of course, free to paint the palm tree itself as well, so I'll add a few little details here to the palm tree. Where the trunk hits the palm tree, I always tend to bring these two colors together. I don't want these palm trees or any tree to make it look like there's a stick with a ball of foliage on the end. This all has to look like one piece. So one way to do that easily is to keep this color of the tree the same color as the trunk, at least part way down. That way it ties it together. Then you can change your colors of the trunk once they're down just a little bit further. And naturally, this trunk would be a little bit darker in here anyway because of the shadows of the palm leaves. This is spring, and there's some beautiful light greens over there. I might not even be able to make them with the colors I have on my palette. I may have to put some cadmium yellow light on here. Let me do that right now. Oh, cadmium yellow light, that's an opaque color. Let me put one more blue out here. This is phthalo blue, and this is a very, very strong color. Now with this, wash my brush out, with this I can make some real intense greens. It may be too intense, I'll put a little red in there, tone it down. Let me put a highlighter too on this bank over here, just to balance it with this very light area here. I don't want it top heavy over this side, so I'm going to add a little bit of light here where this foliage comes down and hits the water. Now I've at least got a few different layers of landscape going here. I need to scrape this off pretty frequently. Start over. There. I think I'll lighten the tops of these reeds just a little bit where the sun is hitting them. Of course, all the colors in the foreground here are going to be a little more intense than the colors in the background. So these reeds being closest to me, I'm going to make these colors a little more intense. One thing I haven't dealt with very much here is the water yet. So maybe I'll work on that for just a moment or two. It's almost unbearable out here, it's so hot. If you don't have to paint outdoors, want to, but you just can't, don't feel bad about it, because there's a lot of difficulties come with this. It's the heat, sometimes the insects, the weather is changing all the time. It's brutal out here. So I never use that term plein air painting. It just makes it sound like everything is just fine all the time. But the truth of the matter is, painting out on location is really tough. I learn a lot by being out here, just being a part of nature and being amongst all this. I most often create my best paintings sitting in my studio at my easel. I probably learn more by being out here, but as far as creating a good painting, back in the studio, that's what does it. Well, what I'm doing now, I'm just sort of fussing with this. I'm just poking here or there. I've kind of, after you work so long on a painting, you have to sort of dismiss yourself, dismiss your mind from it, and pick it up later. Considering it's probably 98 degrees out here too, everybody's getting pretty fried. But this has been a really lovely location. I'm sure I can take this back into the studio now, put a few more touches on it, think about it a little while longer, and I think this will be more than a study. I think this will be a painting that I'll be able to put a frame on. Well, here we are back in our Clearwater, Florida studio, and I'm going to take a few minutes, put a few touches on this painting and try and finish it. We've had a few minutes to download all my photographs that I took out in the field, and I've put them on my computer monitor. Instead of printing them out on a printed page to use as reference, I like to view my photographs on the monitor. This way I can zoom in on the photographs, view different photographs quickly, and move around to see more details. It's a little easier for me to figure out these reflections from my photograph, my reference photograph, than from real life, so I've been working on this just a bit. I mixed up a little cerulean blue and white and scumbled it over these trees here, gave that little bit of cast, blue cast, put these trees in the distance as opposed to these dark trees over here on the right. I've added a little more water in the background here by adding these negative spaces. It also allows me to add some tree trunks and break up this big dark area. I didn't notice it, but I created a tangent here. That means both this line, which is in the background, and these weeds in the foreground are on the same plane. So it's a little hard to tell. The tangents are always a bad thing in paintings. So this line either needs to be lower or this line needs to be higher in order to just give that a different plane. So I've mixed up some light green. I'll bring these weeds up just a little bit. I'm putting some more highlights in these reeds, but I'm careful to vary them from a little bit light to dark to light and so on. I don't want them all the same all the way across. And I'm going to add a little bit of warmth down here along the bank. If I want to add a little bit of a reflection here, I can take the same color and just drag these. While this is still wet, I'll clean my brush off, just run a line through that. Maybe soften it just a bit. I'm going to add a few little details and then maybe create a few reflections from those as well. I've softened up the edges of these trees and added a few more negative spaces. Now I'm working on this palm tree, just adding a little more detail. Here I'll exaggerate some of these colors just a bit with these bright oranges. I'll just put this highlight in certain areas where the sun may be hitting them. Now I'll add a few more details to this dead tree and put in some highlights. And to finish off this area of trees here in the distance, I'll add a few trunks. This also gives me the opportunity to add a few more reflections. Put a couple highlights on the beach over here. I think I'll finish this painting by putting an egret somewhere in this composition. I'm going to use a piece of chalk, and since this is acrylic, this is dry, and I can experiment a little bit as to where the bird might look good. I think that may be a little bit too much in the center. I can just wipe that right off. remove it. Or I could experiment to see whether maybe I wanted 2 or 3 birds in here. Just take that off, note that spot. So now that I've decided where I'm going to put this egret, I've mixed up a little gray color. I don't want pure white. I want to reserve that pure white for a little highlight. With a couple strokes I can put in an egret, and I can add a little reflection underneath him. The reflection will be a little grayer, a little darker than the bird. Now I can take my pure white, add a little bit of highlight on his back and neck. Now I've added a reflection to the bird, but he's also casting a shadow, so I want to put a little bit of dark, just a little bit of shadow right underneath him. I think I'll indicate one more bird. Maybe one more. There, I think that's good. I'm going to add a few more highlights across this water, so I'm going to take my atomizer, spray that just lightly, and I'm just going to add a few more highlights through here. By spraying it, the edges run slightly to make a nice soft edge. If they look a little too strong, I can just soften them. I really enjoyed being on location up in the Withlacoochee River. There's a lot more I could do to this painting. I considered putting a lot more detail in it, but I think I'll keep it the way it is. All I need to do now is I put a signature on it, put a little varnish, spray varnish, and we'll call it quits and go on to the next one.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.